Hey everyone, and welcome to the COPSE Crossroad Project. COPSE is a group of graduate students based at the University of Wyoming that are interested in the use of art-science crossover projects in education. Crossroads is the first project of our group, and we are really excited to be working with you. So let's get started. There are a few important aspects of the Crossroads project that you'll need to understand as we move forward. First, what do we mean by scale? When we use the word scale in this project, we are referring to size and the changes thereof. For example, during this presentation, we will start with the field of genetics, the study of which takes place on such a small scale that you often can't observe the physical components of it. And we will go all the way to the study of star formation, which takes place on an extremely large scale. A simple diagram of a changing scale is the progressively growing circles at the top of this slide. Second, what are fractal patterns? Fractals are complex patterns that are self-similar across different scales. This essentially means that they are patterns that repeat themselves as they get larger or smaller. Though these patterns can at first seem unrecognizable or fantastical, they are actually found all throughout nature, with a few different examples seen here, both purple cabbage and lightning. In fact, these patterns serve as a common thread throughout many different fields, and even bridge science and art. Fractals are one of the many representations that even seemingly dissimilar topics, such as genetics and ceramics, are in fact unavoidably linked to one another. We see fractal patterns across a variety of disciplines, including in what I study. I'm a graduate student in botany at the University of Wyoming, and I study the genetics of wildflowers and the microbes present on them. My main questions revolve around whether the rareness of a plant, specifically looking at the extent of land that a plant can be found over, has a significant effect on the plant's genetic diversity and on the microbes that are present on their leaves. This is important because understanding genetic diversity and microbial interactions can help with population survival in changing climates. There are a few places that I see fractals in my field and in my work, despite the fact that a lot of what I do you can't view with the naked eye and actually use computers to visualize. The picture on the slide with the green background shows what happens when you lyse, or pop open, an E. coli bacterial cell. The yellow fractal pattern around the orange cylindrical cell in the middle is actually bacterial DNA. Also, I work with a specific part or location in bacterial DNA called the 16S rRNA gene, which is depicted here on the right. We use this pattern of DNA in this region to identify what microbes are present in any given sample. As you can see, the structure of this region of the bacterial genome resembles a fractal pattern itself. Now, I'm not the only member of COPSE that works with the 16S gene, so I'll turn it over to Ella to talk to you more about the subject of microbiology.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Erin. So like she said, I'm Ella, and I'm another master's student at the botany department at UW. But I don't really think of myself as a botanist. I think of myself more as a microbiologist or microbial ecologist because I study microbes and how they interact with their environment and other organisms, which do include plants. So some of my research focuses on plant-microbe interactions. As an analogy, if you've heard of the human gut microbiome, which is kind of a hot topic in science because we have evidence that the microbes in and on our body have a really significant impact on a whole bunch of aspects of our health. Plants have sort of an analogous microbiome in and around their roots called the rhizosphere microbiome. And I've studied how that affects how plants can defend themselves against things like insects and how in turn those defenses might affect those microbes. Recently, I've shifted my research a little bit more to study just what microbes are where. So I'm looking at microbes that are in the lake water in the snowies, and whether those are different where there's water lilies and where there aren't water lilies, hence my background and the picture on the slide. So where do I see fractal patterns? Well, I see a lot of fractal patterns when I'm doing research out in the field in the mountains, such as in the veins of the water lily leaves that you might be able to see in my background, but I can't see the microbes that I study, and I wanted to talk about microbes. So as Erin said, I use the 16S rRNA gene to identify the microbes in my samples. And one of the ways that we like to use to try and understand those microbes and their relationships are these phylogenetic trees that I've shown on the slide that show a fractal pattern. So this isn't really something that I see in nature, but it's something that I see a lot in my research in the articles that I read. And they can often look pretty cool and sort of bridge that art science gap. One of the places where we can actually see fractal patterns in microbiology are fungal hyphae, which are often considered microbes, even though we can see most of them with our naked eye. So here are some examples of fractal patterns from the scale that we can see over on the left, to the microscopic scale over on the right. And fungi play a really important role in plant microbe interactions, as things like mycorrhizal fungi help plants uptake nutrients. And they also play a really important role in soil ecosystems.
Hi, my name is Allie, and I study how plants and the microorganisms that live around them interact with each other. My research asks the question, how do plants talk with the microbes that live around their roots? First, I use genetics to look at microbes that live around the plant roots. Then chemistry to look at the chemicals that the plant roots give off that they may be using to talk with the microbes in the soil. Like Ella mentioned before, when talking about her water lily research, microorganisms can be very important in keeping a plant happy and healthy. Plants that live in different kinds of soils can have different microbes that live around them, and this can affect the health of the plant. So knowing how plants communicate with the microbes in the soil of different places can help us understand why plants grow in the places that they do and how we can make the plants healthier using microbes. In my research, I see fractal patterns everywhere. I see patterns in the genetics data I use to look at what microbes are there, like in this heat map. I see patterns in my data that often repeat. And when I make graphs and figures to see these patterns, they can look very similar to the repeated patterns that we see in fractal patterns. When I look at the soil, I can see fractal patterns from crystals made by the different chemical components in the soil, like salts and metals and organic matter. So the pattern, if you just look at how the crystals, the atoms of the crystal line up, it will have basically the same shape as when the crystal grows and gets bigger. And I also see fractal patterns in plant roots and plant leaves and plant flowers. So in the picture here, you can see the plant roots, how they just grow and branch. And in plant leaves, you can see the growing, branching, repeating patterns of the veins that go through the plant leaves. And in plant flowers, you see something very similar, where you'll have the repeated patterns of the petals and the formation of the petals. And it's all really, really cool.
Hi everyone, my name is Gordon and I study soil ecology at the University of Wyoming. Specifically, I study how plants, soil, and the soil microbes like fungi and bacteria interact and respond to ecosystem level changes. The questions I hope to address can be summed up as, how do soil microbes, both bacteria and fungi, respond to plant invasion and herbicide application? You might be wondering, why does this research matter? Well, soil microbes are responsible for many ecosystem processes like decomposition. Without them, we couldn't grow food. We seek to understand how microbes respond to plant invasion to better understand how the ecosystem will change following a disturbance like plant invasion. Furthermore, we hope to use this information to combat further plant invasions. While not specifically a soil scientist, I work with soils and all that inhabits them. I see patterns in soil all the time. We see fractal patterns in the wet microbial mats of Yellowstone, pictured on the left, and even in dry soils as well, pictured in the middle. And like Ella showed with fungi, we also see similar patterns in soil bacteria as well. We see the same type of patterns in soils across all sorts of scales, ranging from the microbes that inhabit the soils all the way up to plant roots. Soils are one of our most important resources and should be treated as such.
Hi, my name is Claire and I'm a pollinator ecologist. I study how climate change is impacting pollinators, and specifically I am studying bumblebees. To understand how bumblebees will respond to temperature, I look at things like survival and damage to their cells. I am also interested in male bumblebees since they play a really important role in reproduction and the growth of the colony. Pollinators are a critical role in our ecosystem since many of our crops and food rely on pollination from bees. Bees are especially important to plants and flowers as they pollinate and promote plant growth. I also see fractal patterns in my research on bumblebees. And some examples of these patterns include the wings of the bees. As you can see, then there's a network of veins that goes through the wings to carry hemolymph, which is kind of like bee blood throughout the wing. And this fractal pattern disperses the blood throughout the wings, and this is commonly seen in other winged insects. Flight in bees is also seen as a fractal pattern since bees use the angle of the sun to navigate, and this leads them to travel in distinct patterns. Bees use these types of patterns to forage for pollen and nectar, and this increases their likelihood of finding good resources. And some examples of their flight patterns are shown in these graphs down here.
My name is Will, and I am an ecohydrologist. I study a mix of ecology and hydrology in forests. And my research focuses on where trees get their water from. And part of that, I use some different techniques to sample water from trees. And a lot of that focuses on the part above the ground. And so we see fractal patterns with tree branches that you can see on the bottom left here. And I sample them with a trimmer, as you can see on the right, and extract some of the water out of that with a pressure chamber, as you can see in the middle. And we're really interested in how trees use water and how they might react to a changing climate, especially because these trees' water use could impact stream flow. And we're interested in how much stream flow we get because we need some of that for drinking water, we need some of it for agriculture, and many other things, just like washing your car or taking a shower. And at a larger scale, we see fractal patterns in this stream flow when we look at it at a much broader scale, and it actually helps by looking at it from outer space. But you can see on this map here of the Platte River Basin, you have many different rivers that connect that eventually flow into the Missouri River, that eventually flows into the Mississippi, that eventually flows into the Gulf of Mexico. In Laramie, we are actually part of the North Platte River Basin. And on the right, you can see a much more natural image of the Earth's landscape, where you can see all these intricate fractal patterns and these drainage basins that all connect together to make this really cool pattern. And the white there is some snow, and you can imagine that snow melts and contributes to some of these drainage patterns. And these images are capable by looking at the Earth from outer space with some satellites, and we also see many other things on other planets and within outer space that have patterns. And with that, I'll let Jessica share some more about her research and the patterns that she sees.
Thanks, Will. So one thing I wanted to talk about before I talk about my own research, some of you all might have seen on the news in a few weeks ago, maybe at this point, one of the really exciting things that happened in astronomy was NASA landed a new rover on Mars, the Perseverance rover. And why I wanted to talk about that briefly is because I think it really hits on a way that we're kind of combining all of the fields that we've talked about today into one big research project. So the NASA Perseverance rover landed in the Jezero crater, which is what is shown here, where we can see a river flow pattern kind of similar to what Will was showing in the Platte River Basin. The other way that the Perseverance rover relates to the fields that have been talked about today is that it's going to be looking for signs of microbial life in the soil of Mars. So it's kind of uniting soil science, microbiology, this kind of study of hydrology and rivers, along with my field, which is astronomy. I don't study Mars though. I actually study what's happening in other galaxies. So when I think of the fractal patterns that we've been talking about today, one of the places that I really start to think of is star forming regions, both within our galaxy, the Milky Way, and in other galaxies in the universe. And so these tend to be thousands of light years across, and we can kind of see this one in the Monkey Head Nebula, where the clouds of gas that the stars, these baby stars, are going to form out of, have started to collapse, and we get this similar kind of almost tree branch pattern, even though now we're not looking at trees, we're looking at stellar nurseries essentially, which is really cool. Another place where I see these similar fractal patterns is when I look at
even larger scale, so now billions of light years, look at the entire structure of the universe. So really from the microbial to the entire universe, we see these same patterns. And that is what we see here, where I'm showing you the cosmic web. So the cosmic web is how galaxies are aligned and clustered within our universe. And we can see on this figure here, each of these red and green points is a different galaxy, where we're looking at position on the sky and also distance from us. And we can see a similar kind of branching pattern, again, kind of looks like those mushroom roots almost, where galaxies tend to clump together and where there aren't any galaxies. Similarly, this computer simulation that shows how we can start to use almost graphic design to model the structures we see in the universe, bringing it back to this idea of art and design and how that relates to what we're doing in the sciences.
So fractal patterns can be seen through almost every type of media. With art, we base a lot of what we create on things we find in nature, and fractal patterns are pretty common. With everything that you've just seen, from the tiniest microbes to galaxies themselves, artists are constantly inspired by the world around them, and a lot of what we use to create also mimics those same patterns found in nature. Where I recognize patterns in my work ranges from my digital illustrations using different effects based on mathematical equations, which are in turn based on these patterns we find. I also see it when using watercolor with salt. The salt absorbs the water around it, creating these incredibly interesting fractal patterns. And I also see it in my 3D modeling work with certain textures like the Voronoi texture, which is again based on this mathematical equation that replicate these fractals. I see it outside of what I do in certain ceramic glazes where a chemical reaction causes a fractal effect on the finished piece. And even some iconic works of art, like a scene from Michelangelo's painted ceiling on the Sistine Chapel. Over time, due to certain circumstances, the oil cracks and mimics these same fractal patterns that we see everywhere else. As the next phase of COPSE Crossword Project, you'll be creating your own art around fractal patterns. We are excited to continue working with all of you and look forward to talking with you directly come March.